So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Doug Cook. I'm the Education and Events Coordinator over at NOFA Mass. And with us today is Christy Bassett, our Communications Director. And we are here because we know it's time for systems change. And this workshop will examine root solutions, parity, supply management, dismantling racism, antitrust, fair trade, and food for people, not profit. And with us tonight is Liz Henderson, a vintage organic farmer. And I, as well as many other organic activists across the region, are continually inspired by your dedication and to a healthy and just future. Before we jump in, we have a number of sponsors who help make this event possible. So I encourage you to support them. And when you do support them, remember to mention how much you appreciate their support of NOFA Mass. And of course, you have probably seen this if you've been to our events. We use this slide to remind us all that, and to acknowledge that we are occupying land that has been occupied for millennia prior to European colonization. Unfortunately, through systemic racism, most of the land that is now farmland especially is owned by white people. And basically we want to, as NOFA Mass, recognize that we are working on this. So we have a working document that is our racial equity statement. And with that statement, we hope to, show our process in helping to heal the harm that racism has caused in the food system. So we've offered these small but meaningful actionable items here. Our goal as an organization is to help provide resources, to be a partner, and stand against white supremacist behaviors, and work to dismantle racism within the food and agricultural systems. Well, by no means are those small, but together, we can work together to come together and can feed the Commonwealth and feed and serve the commonality of us all. So we have shared the link to this Indigenous land map. It's a great resource for anybody in the Americas. And it's also in other parts of the world as well, and continually being updated, a great resource. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz Henderson. And I think we would like to hear from everybody a little bit about why you're here.
Well, hello, everybody. That's how I would like to start this. I'd appreciate it very much if each of you could introduce yourself, say what your main enterprise is in the world, and then give us one reason or two why you want to attend this workshop, what you hope to get out of it. So Doug, can you manage that of going around to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone would like to start off, you can bring yourself off of mute. You can take a turn. Or I might call on people if you've got your video on, Joel.
Yeah, why don't you call on people? That might work better.
Sure, I can go first. Joel Betts from the Worcester County Conservation District in Holden and all of Worcester County. I'm an ecologist, care a lot about systems change and living with the land, and a lot about our ecological and social history. And so definitely interested in broader picture stuff, not just the practical nitty gritty like we do in our job here. So excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Joel. ML, would you like to speak up?
So I'm the chair of my local agricultural commission. I have a small farm. I have a fine garden landscaping business, and I helped to found the Ecological Landscaping Association about 30 years ago. Not involved with that anymore because I'm involved with a whole lot of other stuff more locally. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to go next? Dale, are you interested in saying hello?
Hi, I'm a gardener in Northampton, and I'm involved with our local Climate Action Now Western Mass organization. And one of the things that we're trying to do is update our food pages so that they more beneficially reflect what the food system could be rather than what it is now. And so I'm gathering information to help to update those pages.
Thank you. Emily, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hello. I can't figure out why my video is not turning on right now, but my name is Emily, and I'm living in Hadley, Massachusetts right now, and I just worked at Stone Soup Farm in Hadley this season, and I'm figuring out my next step. And I'm here in this workshop because I am just constantly trying to reconcile my love of food and growing food and working with plants with the definite knowledge that of the racism that's attached to the whole system and obviously all the connected systems. And yeah, I've been involved with climate justice work and food justice work. And so this workshop caught my eye. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you. Don, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Dawn Burrow. I currently live in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I'm a therapist and an educator, and a gardener as a hobby. And I'm increasingly concerned and curious about ways to get more urban agriculture into our local environment here in Somerville. And I'm going to be part of a climate ambassador program here with the city of Somerville. And so anytime we're talking about systems and systems of change, I'm thinking about how are they connected to education? How is it connected to mental health? How is it connected to physical health? Because I think those two things are the same. And how are our food systems set up, and why are they set up that way? So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Ginger, would you like to take a turn?
Sure. My name's Ginger. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front, and I'm currently in Cambridge, but I recently retired as a social worker, and I've been spending most of my time as a new gardener in Rhode Island. But I think this is a really important topic. I think we really need to change our food system to make it work for everybody. And we've really been aware of it through COVID, that it's really broken. So this is an interesting topic to me.
Thank you. Carol, would you like to take a turn?
Sure. There's a bunch of reasons, actually. Let's see, one of them, I noticed someone said they're from Hadley. I went to school at Mount Holyoke, political science and economics, and I did a couple internships in DC. So I've always been amazed with the policies, the horrific lack of good thinking behind the policies. And I'm also in the investment and financial planning world, and I'm in shock of how healthcare is our food and soil system, not put money aside to pay for a gazillion pills and stuff later on. And then also I've been taking 3 years of courses from a bunch of places. And I've always known this, but not only do we need food security, but we need food sovereignty, which is so much more powerful than food security. Instead of shipping it from abroad, have them local access to the food. And the whole healthcare system, as they said, it's getting out into nature. I mean, I noticed that 34 states now allow doctors to prescribe going into nature to help with their anxiety and stress problems. And they even say they've been proved that it reduces the chance of getting one of the many, many, many cancers. And I've had way too many family members, I'm from New Jersey, pass away from cancer. And I really think that this is out. And I also helped convert a church land that was burnt down a couple years ago, and someone let cheap fill come in. So I actually had an excellent experience converting that to its really healthy lawn with all this organic compost and multiple different types of grass, including clover, and gazillion rocks were included in the cheap fill. So I experimented with flowers and all what it can attract and the whole benefit. Yeah, so I'm all over this.
Thank you, Carol. Scully, would you like to take a moment to say hello?
Yeah, I'm Scully. Last winter, I found out about Sunrise, and they sounded like they sounded like they were a good group to join to do something about climate change, but okay. Sunrise focuses too much on what you can do with smartphones to help with climate change, and I don't own a smartphone. I like their plan with the Green New Deal. New Deal to a certain extent. I like the plan with the Green New Deal for the most part, and their plan with focusing on helping the best politicians get reelected, and getting out some of the politicians that are bad anomalies. That one I am a little hesitant about, but getting out some of the worst politicians, those things I think are great, but I don't own a smartphone, so so they weren't actually that good of a fit for me with if as far as it went with, to actually do much.
Thanks, Scully. I'm going to pass the mic.
Okay. This was climate change, and I couldn't find any better workshop.
Welcome. Anita, would you like to say hello?
Hello, my name is Anita Dunch. I'm an economist and an academic, and my research and teaching is on environmental economics and food systems. And I have a lot of, I grow food, and I have huge ambitions about growing more food, but I'm mainly interested in this topic from a research and teaching standpoint, and action, and being an activist and wanting to, change things.
Thank you. And now, would any other folks who in the virtual back of the classroom there like to say hello? Heather?
Good afternoon. My name's Heather McLean. I live in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston, and I'm in my final year of graduate school for urban planning and community development at UMass Boston, and my particular interests are food systems and affordable housing being a more recent one. And so I, like Anita, am kind of looking at things from more of a large picture research point of view right now. And so just trying to get my mind around policy and systems and how we got to where we are and what are opportunities for going someplace different. So looking forward to what everyone has to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Maria, I saw you come off for a second there. Would you like to say hello? Oh, you're on mute. Let me help you with that. Here, you'll have to unmute yourself, Maria. You're all right. There we go.
Thank you. I'm a retired teacher, a language teacher, also a food activist, and I do food as medicine. I'm also a farmer at the World Farmers in Lancaster, Massachusetts. And I really want to be up to date because so many changes so far. So for me, it is very important to know exactly what is going to be next. So I'm here, I'm ready to keep working with you.
Okay.
Thank you for good. Let's see, who hasn't? Daniel, would you be interested in saying hello? And G. Palano?
Sure. Yeah, hi, I'm a gardener in the Boston area. And I'm just, yeah, interested in, I've worked with Elizabeth before on an agroecology webinar, so I know that she's very knowledgeable and has a lot of interesting things to say. So I'm hoping to learn some more about, food system, what changes need to be made to food systems to deal with, the various ecological crises and how, what sort of practical steps can we take toward actually making that happen.
Thank you. And G. Palano, would you like to say hello? No pressure. I think that's all. Liz, would you like to carry on?
Great. Well, thank you. It's very nice to know who's in the room with me. It makes me feel more comfortable than just sitting and talking into a camera. Now, the Green New Deal is not a finished product. It's not a total program. It's an emergency mobilization to address the economic inequities and reverse our march toward catastrophic climate change. Continual farm crises affect all but the largest farms and direct marketers. Guy Dauncey, who is the practical utopian, has done a really helpful comparison of 10 different Green New Deal proposals, including Bernie's and Elizabeth Warren's, Inslee, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and United States Greens and other. And his piece includes an amazing list of possible policies for a Green New Deal. But the ideas that we will share in this session can contribute to whatever Green New Deal will unfold, either on the state or national levels, and provide ideas for what we could build into the 2023 Farm Bill. Varshini Prakash, who's one of the leaders of the Sunrise Movement, said in an interview, "So in 2021, we think there's a real opportunity to pass the first policy that will crack open what we are calling the decade of the Green New Deal. The transformations required to stop climate change are so massive that we're going to have to keep at it for decades to come if we're actually going to realize a world that is just and equitable for all people." So let me share my screen.
There we go. Looks good.
So first, a few words of introduction. Why am I leading off this conversation? I started farming in 1978, 79, 80, and I was well aware of the farm crisis that was underway. There were cavalcades of farmers on tractors occupying the streets of Washington, D.C., a little different from what happened this week. My farm was one of the earliest CSAs. And CSA was deliberately designed to include customers in supporting family scale farms. And CSA is still the only form of marketing where customers share the risks and benefits of the farming. All of the members of Piecework CSA participated in picking up, doing farm work, doing distribution. We had a very active group of core members who took care of many administrative tasks. They signed other people up. They scheduled the work on the farm and the work at distribution. And I wrote a book about CSA together with Robin Van En, and it's been translated into Japanese, Chinese, Thai, and Spanish. And by now, CSA can be found really all the way around the world. And I'm the honorary president of Urgency, which is an international CSA network. Check it out sometime. And I've also served as the New York representative on the NOFA Interstate Council, where the 7 state chapters come together to coordinate lightly. And I have served as the NOFA representative to the Agricultural Justice Project, which is a domestic fair trade certification program that campaigns for fair prices for farmers and fair working conditions for people who work on farms and other food enterprises, all the way through the food chain from farm to table. So here's a summary of the standards of the Agricultural Justice Project Food Justice Certification. And these standards get into a lot of the issues that I think we would all want addressed in a Green New Deal. So this is a summary of Resolution 109, which was the AOC Senator Markey resolution. And it's provided a needed jolt to public consciousness, which has made it possible for the first time in decades to talk about root solutions for the ongoing crisis of family farms in this region, in this country, and all the way around the world, without being subject to the won't pass the laugh test suppression due to the capture of Congress by extreme right-wing and corporate interests. We face an intersectional set of crises: climate, ecology, inequality, racial injustice, the pandemic. They're all interrelated. And meanwhile, the farm crisis that I recognized when I began as a farmer has continued. This country is losing farmland and losing family scale farms. The biggest farms are getting bigger, and this has been going on and it continues. And as Secretary of Agriculture Perdue recently crowed, despite the reality that even those big farms are losing real net income. So it's going down for all of the farms. The loss of family farmland has been especially acute for farmers of color and African American farmers. They've lost their land 5 times as fast as the white farmers. So much of the work that we've been doing on Buy Local and in support of smaller scale farms has had to focus on tinkering around the edges, making incremental improvements that have made it possible for many more farms to survive and for some new ones to get started. That's been the role of the National Organic Program. But the underlying problems of systemic racism that functions as a mainstay of corporate dominance in the food system has been beyond our reach. It hasn't been realistic for us to address. The farmer's share of the food dollar has been shrinking. Big brands have been buying up smaller companies, and this slide only shows what has happened within the organic industry. Phil Howard, who put this together, continues to monitor what's happening both in the larger food system and in organic. So you can go to his website and see the latest consolidation that's taken place. Farmers have fewer choices of buyers and less market power. Corporate consolidation has everything to do with whether we look at processed foods. So here's a slide from USDA that shows bread, and the upper line, the orange line, shows the rise in the price of bread. And down at the bottom, you see what's happened to what farmers got. So the price to consumers is going up much faster than the price to farmers. And this is for broccoli. So the same kind of thing is happening both for value-added products and for raw ingredients. And I've shared all these slides with you, so you're welcome to study them more. 3 mega corporations control 63% of the world's seed sales, as well as ag chemicals, beef packers like Tyson, Conagra, Cargill, Farmland. 81% of soybean exports, that's Cargill, Continental Grain, Archer Daniels Midlands, Zenno, 65%. According to the National Farmers Union, just 6 companies control the markets for inputs that farmers need to grow their crops, and 4 companies control the majority of purchasing and processing of cattle, hogs, and chicken. And this consolidation has led to increased costs for farmers, less choice and competition in the marketplace, less innovation, and increased prices for consumers. In turn, it results in farmland consolidation and rural depopulation. Recent figures show that the 4 largest companies slaughter 84% of the hogs, 85% of all cattle, and 54% of all the chicken in the United States. Most farms survive because of someone's off-farm work. And when the ERS breaks this down by farming category, there are some crops where farm earnings represent a significant portion of the household income. So in rice and tobacco and cotton and peanuts, or in dairy or cash grains. And then others where the farm is actually losing money. So high value crops, which is the one with 2 stars, and then other field crops, those just barely contribute to household income, whereas poultry and beef and general livestock are losing money for the household. So the other members of the household are supporting the farming habit of the farmer in their family. Brad Wilson, who is an Iowa farmer and a farmer justice champion for decades, makes the case very convincingly that the subsidies that foodies talk about so much have only replaced a very small percentage of the wealth that has been transferred from farms to big corporations by the shift away from parity to a cheap food system. So here you see the prices that farmers got under parity in this one. And then you see the prices that farmers are getting today, which is the blue. And the red is the share of farm revenue that is made up by all the different government payments. So when farmers were getting parity prices, they were getting more than they are getting together with those subsidies. And the subsidies under the parity years were really small, the part that the taxpayer had to pay. This year, taxpayers are paying about 1/3 of all of farm revenues. That's globally. So that doesn't mean for every individual farm. It certainly doesn't mean for the small farms, but for agriculture as a whole, 1/3 of farm revenues is coming from us taxpayers. A mainstay of corporate power is the systemic racism in food system jobs. So here you see race and gender in the wage gap. People of color are making less than the white people, and the jobs that are the lead jobs, the managers, the owners, those are largely white men, and it's people of color who are way at the bottom. And many of the food jobs are paying so poorly that workers, despite working full time, or even working 2 or 3 jobs, still have to rely on public assistance to survive. Walmart gets billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidy by us paying for the SNAP payments to their workers. Walmart actually gives workshops to people who train Walmart workers how to access SNAP payments. And Walmart would rather pay for those workshops than to pay those workers more so that they didn't need the SNAP payments to start out with. The climate emergency and the COVID-19 pandemic open a new era where we must re-examine current ways of operating and urgently set to work, designing a new detailed set of programs for a truly sustainable, just, and equitable food system based on the historical experience of frontline participants in growing food for local communities. So what did the New Deal accomplish for agriculture? Under tremendous pressure from social movements, the New Deal established production control plus price supports. In 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, so many farm families were going bankrupt that the federal government stepped in to help them avoid eviction and to increase prices for their crops. So the Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA, declared an economic emergency, justifying action as being in the national public interest. And the AAA set out to reestablish farmers' purchasing power, taking the years just before World War I as the base period when the proper balance existed among what farmers were getting, the prices paid in the marketplace, and what consumers had to pay for their food. To raise prices for farm products, the AAA reduced the overall supply by setting limits in the form of marketing quotas on the acreage farmers could use for basic commodities. And that very first year, some crops were even plowed under. Farmer Ben Burkett, who's one of the leaders in the Federation of Southern Co-ops, remembers that when he was a young guy, there was actually a team from USDA who had come out to his father's farm with a chain that was a yard long, and they would measure the field that his father had planted. And if the field was bigger than what he was allocated under supply management, he had to plow some of it under. And Ben would say that it looked like the white farmers didn't have to plow under as much as the black farmers. Anyway, there were also marketing agreements, and those controlled the quantity, quality, and rate of shipment to market to limit some fruits and vegetable crops. And although agribusiness successfully brought suit against the first version of this parity system, the revised approach that was set up by the Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act of 1936 proved durable and lasted all the way through the 1960s. Farm income in 1935 was more than 50% higher than farm income during 1932, and it was due in part to these farm programs. And from 1935 through 1974, legislation each year set the level of the price supports from 50 to 90% of parity, depending on the supply of each commodity and the changing economic conditions through the years of World War II. In Crisis by Design, a brief review of US farm policy, a paper written by Mark Ritchie and Kevin Ristow and published by the League of Rural Voters Education Project in the midst of the 1960s farm crisis. The three central features of the parity system are summarized in this way. One, it established the Commodity Credit Corporation, the CCC, which made loans to farmers whenever prices offered by the food processors or grain corporations fell below the cost of production. This allowed farmers to hold their crops off market, eventually forcing prices back up. And once prices returned to fair levels, farmers could sell their crops and then repay the CCC with interest. And in this way, the government actually made some money on the deal. By allowing farmers to control their marketing, the CCC loan program made it possible for them to receive a fair price from the marketplace without relying on subsidies. 2, it regulated farm production in order to balance supply with demand, thereby preventing surpluses. And since government storage of surpluses was expensive, this feature was crucial to reducing government costs. And 3, it created a national grain reserve to prevent consumer prices from skyrocketing in times of drought or other natural disasters. When prices rose above a predetermined level, grain was released from government reserves onto the market, driving prices back down. And this legislation remained in effect from 1933 to 1953 and was extremely successful. Farmers received fair prices for their crops, production was controlled to prevent costly surpluses, and consumer prices remained low and stable. At the same time, the number of new farmers increased, soil and water conservation practices expanded dramatically, it ended the Dust Bowl, and overall farm debt declined. And what is even more important is that this parity program was not a burden to taxpayers. In the 1960s, however, according to Mark Ritchie in The Loss of Our Family Farms, Inevitable Results or Conscious Policies, a consortium of agribusiness, banking, and university leaders deliberately set in place policies that cut farm prices to drive excess resources, that is, farmers and their families and workers on farms, out of the countryside. By the mid-1970s, farm prices were dropping below parity. Instead of a system that had provided stability for family-scale farms, farm numbers were decreasing rapidly, and the cheap food policies that we have today were set in place. So while we can learn a lot from that old New Deal, both its strengths and also its failures, especially in regard to farmers of color, we will have to design a new version for the 21st century. And that is what From Parity to Disparity has set out to do. So you can visit disparity.org. I've been part of that project, and we've just launched our website, and it will be expanding with more essays. And we are sending out a call to mandate fair pricing and update supply management to build a racially just, economically empowered, and climate resilient food system. This project is headed up by the National Family Farm Coalition, and the initiative includes farmers, both organic and conventional, the Federation of Southern Co-ops, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, Food and Water Watch, and researchers from several universities in, quote, united by a commitment to farmer, worker, land, food, and climate justice, racial equity, and well-being for all. The central goal of this campaign is to build on the momentum of the Green New Deal to transform the fundamentals of US food policy and reshape the 2023 Farm Bill. The Disparity to Parity campaign takes as fundamental that a Green New Deal for food and agriculture must prioritize racial justice and equity in the safety net that it provides for farms. We can build on the achievement of the New Deal with a Green New Deal that not only provides fair prices from the market, but is linked to social justice. Issues of equity, making sure there is a place at the table for the previously marginalized voices of family-scale farmers, farmers of color, and farm workers, making sure they're central to those who design the new parity system. This is an historic opportunity to put equity front and center in our work for a food system that is worth sustaining. The language of the Green New Deal resolution centers on creating a just transition, opening the door to climate justice groups, Indigenous peoples networks, farm workers, and farmers of color. Their voices demand support for community food sovereignty, including and I quote, a restorative framework for indigenous-based policy reform in hunting, fishing and gathering rights and forestry, fisheries, rangeland, environmental conservation, health, agriculture, and rural and community development. This morning, I was reading an essay by Chris Newman, who is a young African-American indigenous farmer in the Maryland area, who is setting out to smash all the icons that we have in agriculture, both conventional and sustainable. And he asserts, somewhat belligerently, that we need to build cooperative structures to take direct marketing beyond the 10% of the markets that in the very best direct marketing areas like Vermont, where almost 10% of the market actually is direct sales from farms. But that still leaves 90% of the market. So we need to move into that 90% because it's firmly in the control of the corporate food and chemical system. We need to take on fair markets, fair trade, fair contracts, if we are really going to make basic change in our food system. So as I mentioned before, Secretary of Agriculture Perdue made a speech recently where he repeated what Earl Butz had said, get big or get out. Johanna Rupert, who's an organizer with the Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota, responded, don't get big or get out, get together and fight back. So the Green New Deal gives us an opening. Let's decide together what to do with it. So I'm going to stop that share and open this up for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Liz. All right, now, folks, it's time to start our conversation. If you have any questions burning on the top of your head, you're welcome to bring yourself off of mute and say hello and ask your question yourself. Or if you'd rather type it into the chat, we can, I could read them for you as they come up. I just like to bring up that there have been some nice links shared during the conversation. One from Dale from the Climate Action Now a group of Western Mass, talking about their upcoming series. And so do take advantage of that. It's Ed Stockman coming up on February 2nd. Another free workshop. And if you haven't already checked out the disparitytoparity.org website, that's also another great resource. Thank you, Heather, for sharing that. And Carol, thanks for sharing that other resource about food waste.
I've actually been rather frustrated with Climate Action Now in the sense that every time I've joined an event by them, we haven't actually gotten to anything actionable. Actionable, and Sunrise is rather invested in smartphones, and I don't own a smartphone. So, like, is there any other groups that I could look into?
Well, what's very actionable is to become an active member of NOFA. There's a policy committee in your state. Join them. You don't have to have a smartphone to be a member of the policy, and there are policies that can be taken both on the local level, on the state level, and the national or even international level to make the kind of changes that I've been talking about. And in NOFA, Massachusetts, I know people are working very hard on a soil health program for the state. Building soil health contributes to mitigating climate change. It builds carbon in the soils. It's part of bringing about a Green New Deal that will really transform our agriculture. And as someone very appropriately mentioned building food sovereignty so that we don't depend on food that's shipped in for other places, but can get food from our local farms.
Okay. I'll look into NOFA. It's called NOFA Policy Committee.
NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association in Massachusetts. Yeah, contact NOFA. Marty Dagoberto is the policy coordinator. And there's a committee that's working on state legislation and also more local things. Like there are a number of localities in which NOFA Mass has been leading efforts to ban glyphosate. And you're more likely to be able to do it in a small town where the Farm Bureau doesn't have a big presence and out in the country. So there's lots to do. Scully, if you have energy, you can find a place to use it.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions or comments?
I had a question. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Joel. Thank you.
So I work in the USDA office in Holden, and you're talking about a Green New Deal, including, agricultural components, and, how, back in with the original New Deal, the USDA had a big part of that. So I'm wondering, I guess, if you know of any specific programs that would get implemented on the local level through our offices that the Green New Deal currently includes, or what it could include, if there's carbon tax systems that allow, we would be the people in the field helping farmers access funds for sequestering carbon, for example. Is that in the works? Is it not? If so, how can we help from the USDA office, people on the ground, to make that happen? Who do we advocate to? Because I'm on board with that kind of stuff, but my job is mostly implementing programs that exist. Maybe it has to do with farm bill advocacy for the next farm bill. But
well, Joel, your role is actually critical in making these things happen on the ground. Legislation that will be part of this decade of the Green New Deal that Sunrise was talking about will give a lot more resources to the kinds of programs for which you are providing technical assistance to farmers, right in your locality. I don't know exactly how it's going to work in Massachusetts, but the soil health legislation that we're writing in New York State would build on the programs that work through the soil and water conservation districts. So in New York, there's an agricultural environmental management program. Every farm can do an agricultural environmental management plan with their soil and water conservation district, and then be eligible for funding for technical assistance, for planting more trees, for planting cover crops, for getting advice on how to do that more effectively.
Yep. So
this is going to be
Same
a
here.
really important aspect of a Green New Deal.
Right. And I mean, I could see investing in conservation districts and ramping up, there'd be a need to ramp up the number of people working on this stuff if we have some sort of transformational top-down program, like a Green New Deal, because there'd be a lot of need for everyone to be able to access those programs. So
well, in Massachusetts
really
and in New York, the NOFA chapters are working on soil health policies that will be accessible to organic farmers as well as conventional farmers. And we're part of a network of farmer-based organizations all over the country that's doing the same thing. And all of us together are members of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and other national coalitions that are pushing together with Sunrise and others for a Green New Deal that is going to bring a lot more resources to building soil health, building carbon, planting trees. And the part that the disparity to parity is adding to this is having basic food pricing policies that enable farmers to stay in business. Giving farmers incentives to planting cover crops is really important, and that's a good supplement to what they get in the marketplace. But most farmers, organic and otherwise, we don't want government handouts. We want to be selling and getting a decent price for the work that we do, and to have a relationship with our customers that the people who are eating our food can afford to pay for it, whether through sliding scales or nutrition programs that provide SNAP or other nutritional benefits for the low-income people, or by us being part of a national coalition that's going to raise wages for the lowest paid so that everybody can afford to pay for the food that they want, so that fast food workers can buy the slow food that we grow on our organic farms. So I'm really glad, Joel, that you were able to come, because NRCS is one of the critical agencies that's going to be involved in making these things happen.
Definitely.
Thank you. That brings us into a nice segue into a question that Daniel posted in the chat. Daniel, would you like to come off of mute and ask that?
Sure. So yeah, my question is, so a lot of these policies you've talked about, it sounds like they really depend on the Green New Deal or some similar policy being passed. But you know, the situation we're in with the political regime in this country is that most politicians, quite frankly, are in the pocket of corporations that are actively lobbying against the Green New Deal or, you know, any similar policies that could threaten their profits, you know, threaten their market dominance. So what can we do to fight for things like food sovereignty, parity pricing, food justice, without relying on, you know, these corporate politicians and these mega corporations to have some sort of change of heart that doesn't seem very likely? And especially, like, how can, you know, we sort of fight for these things like on the local scale without depending on, you know, a corrupt regime, that sort of thing?
Well, that's really a great question. And obviously, you know, we can have a long discussion about what are the best things to do. In New York NOFA, we wrote a New York Organic Action Plan. And you can see that on the NOFA New York website, where we tried to imagine what you could do yourself in your personal behavior by switching to eating organic food, growing a garden, buying from local farms, supporting local farmers in every way you can, buying at a farmer's market, joining a CSA, to what you could do on a county level by, together with other people, like-minded people, making sure that county food policies were supportive of local farms, to what we can do on a state level, changing policies. And that means being in the political arena. And all of the NOFA chapters have started to do more of this by pushing state level legislation and also working in the national arena on legislation. I suggest, Daniel, that you read Zephyr Teachout's new book, Break 'em Up, about how we can break up the big corporations. There was a lot of antitrust in the past. There's policy that's already on the books. It just has to be used. And we have to pressure our representatives to make use of it. The way I think about it is, I think we have to ride 3 horses, like at a NOFA summer conference where the wonderful display of horseback riding. We have to oppose the nasty things that have been going on, stop the chemicals, stop the poisons that are being used. We have to do our basic work in our own lives. And that has to be the biggest part of our work, to change what we eat, to grow food, to make sure that we have organic farms around us and support young people to get into farming, people of color. Native Americans to reclaim their land. These are all things that we can work on at many different levels. And then have a vision for where we want to go. And that's what I'm trying to present with this workshop, is the big long-term policy of having a food system where farms are paid fairly for what they produce, so that the farmers can pay decent wages to the people who work for them.
As an organic consumer, I still am not sure what to do about the fact that the organic standard has been weakened. Recently, and I don't know if the organic movement's been weakened by the same administration, but the organic standard definitely has, and it didn't, and it's been being weakened for a long time. I like organic potatoes over conventional potatoes, but how much better is it still to get organic, and what can I do within this shop and I do at Stop and Shop?
Well, Scully, you've asked a bunch of questions all at once, and let me see if I can pick it apart and at least answer some of what you've said. The National Organic Program hasn't actually weakened the standards. What they've weakened is the way that they implement those standards. So they are not doing adequate monitoring of the farms that are certified organic. They're not monitoring the certification programs that certify those farms. So for you to be sure that when you're in a store and you're buying something that's certified organic, you should buy from farms that are members of the Real Organic Project, and there will be a Real Organic label on them.
They have that now?
That's just starting up. It's brand new.
Oh, when does it come out?
Real Organic Project.
When?
Real Organic. It means farms that are not hydroponic and that are not CAFOs. Farms that are growing in soil, and if they have livestock, that the livestock are getting most of their nutrients by the cows munching the grass themselves with their own mouths, not being fed on dry lots. And then you can go to a farmer's market and buy directly from farmers whom you get to know. That's the surest way of getting what you're paying for. And Christy has put a link to the Real Organic Project in the chat. They're having a series of presentations every Sunday this month that you could try and listen to as well. And then, how do we build our local food system? You do it by paying attention yourself to what you buy. You obviously are a very conscious consumer, Scully, and supporting the good stuff. During this pandemic, I am only eating what I grew in my garden, what I got in my CSA share, and what I can buy in the food co-op. If the food co-op doesn't have it, we don't get it. So I'm doing my very best with my little budget to eat food that is raised by people who have high ethics and as local as possible. And if we all do that, it adds up.
I haven't seen the organic logo.
Voting with your fork is not enough to make these systemic changes. So Daniel, to address, what you said, the politicians, for the most of them right now, are in the pockets of those corporate lobbyists and their backers. We have to have new people in the leadership. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad. And now the squad is going to be bigger because there are more people like that elected. Bowman from New York State. young people have to get out there and do this really hard work of taking over the leadership in Congress. Are there other people who have questions or comments you'd like to make?
Am I muted? No. I have a question about working with Farm Bureau, and especially in the New England states, which is not quite the same as working with them in the Midwest. Farm Bureau has a national standing, but the regional ones have to be more responsive to the local communities that they're attached to. How do you find them as a working partner? Or do you find them as a working partner?
Well, in New York State, we're more like bigger ag than.
Yeah, you are. That's why I don't know if you know anything
and so, we are able to collaborate with the Farm Bureau on some areas where we have common ground.
Okay.
Like the Farm Bureau, it took them a long time to understand how important supporting local farms was, but they got it, and they work on that now. They are in support of a soil health program for New York State. We do not agree on eliminating toxics in agriculture.
Right.
But where we do agree, we can and we do work together. And I think finding that common ground and concentrating on that is really important. And in New York, we've had an organic committee within the Farm Bureau, of Farm Bureau members who are also organic. And that is an effective way of operating with the Farm Bureau, because on a county level, what often happens at the Farm Bureau meeting is people will sit down and say, okay, what do the apple growers need? And the apple growers will say, we need this piece of legislation, or we need support in this way. And they'll say, okay, what do the dairy people need? And then they'll say, okay, and what do the organic people need? And if we state that we need more support from state government, our county Farm Bureau can get behind it, and we can put it in the policy manual for the whole state. We won't make it into the National Farm Bureau, which is way to the right of
that I know.
But on a state and regional level, there are lots of possibilities for cooperation.
Okay. Thanks.
There's a question, where can I research brands? If you don't have a computer yourself, you can go to the local library and get the use of the computer. Every brand these days has a website, and it's very easy to research what products they're selling, often what the ingredients they're using, where they source them from. That kind of research has gotten much easier these days than it used to be. Other people have questions or comments?
I was wondering if you had familiarity in Massachusetts, the Green New Deal and Thrive. The Thrive Agenda have renamed themselves to Massachusetts Renews, and they have a food justice proposal that's part of their plan. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that or had seen that. I mean, I just think that your goals are really, how to take steps towards them. When you were talking, I was thinking how important it was to find money, in a sense, to subsidize farmers so they could pay a decent wage and produce and allow all communities to be able to afford healthy foods. I mean, I think we'll have the federal government often would be the one to, instead of the structure they have now awarding big ag, to have some, if we're paying a third of the money there to keep food going, a third, think of what that would do in the hands of local states, to be able to help farmers be able to afford to sell, at prices that people could afford. That's all. I'm just saying that.
Rather than direct subsidies to farmers,
yeah,
taxpayers putting money in farmers' pockets,
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that most farmers feel very good about.
Okay.
What we do feel good about is using state and federal money and taxpayer money for building the infrastructure
Okay.
that supports our local farms.
Okay.
So what's
Yeah.
happened over the past 50 years is that all of the processing has gotten into bigger and bigger entities and their control. So that's why, when the COVID thing struck, we saw packing,
Yeah.
destroying chickens and
Milk.
killing
Yeah.
milk and stuff like that. Because that slaughterhouse and that meat processing is so centralized that local farms sometimes have to sign up like 18 months in advance to get to use a slaughterhouse that is USDA accredited for their use. So there need to be a lot more small scale processing.
Yeah.
I live in Wayne County, New York, and it's full of empty buildings that used to be local processors. And those processors first moved to Rochester, and then they moved farther west, and then somewhere else altogether. I mean, we still have Mott's apple juice, but it's no longer owned by the Mott family. It's owned by one of the really big drink companies. I forget which, who's got it now, but it's gotten to ever bigger entities. So using funds to build infrastructure, using funds to help raise minimum wages so that all working people can afford to buy good food, doing things that will support farmers markets, having maybe not more of them, but having better run farmers markets, because there are plenty of those. In New York, when they raised the time and a half for overtime. So on a national level, under the National Labor Relations Act, for most sectors of the economy, employers have to pay time and a half for overtime over 40 hours a week. Farm workers were left out of that legislation. And that is why in most of the states at this time, farm workers do not get time and a half for overtime over 40 hours. They will soon in California. In New York now, they get time and a half for overtime over 60 hours. And that will be ratcheted down over a number of years, I think, to eventually get to 40 hours. But if it were done on a national level, changing that National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, so that farm workers would be included with other employees, that would make a big difference for farm workers and match that with higher wages for other working people, a higher minimum wage. In Massachusetts and New York, there's a higher minimum wage than the national minimum wage. But the national minimum wage is still $7.25. And in many states, that is the effective minimum wage for farm workers.
Wow. Okay.
And for food workers.
I get what you mean. It's
and,
really,
and,
this is a real thing.
Waitresses, people who are tipped workers, they can get as little as $2.13 an hour from their employer because the rest is supposed to be made up in tips. So raising those wages to a living wage will make a very big difference to our food system. And then at the same time, taking measures that will help co-ops develop their structures. So there are more and more cooperatives among farmers and among eaters in buying from farmers. Farmers need to get together. I mean, there's a young guy who I mentioned named Chris Newman, who's out smashing icons in this marvelous way. And he really attacks Joel Salatin as a racist and says to Joel, he doesn't explain how this tiny number of successful small farms will compete with Cisco, Aramark, ConAgra, JBS, ADM, and Amazon. Instead, he pens a love letter to himself that poses the success of the farm-to-table movement as a function of his personal wealth and popularity. Metrics that actually matter, that is, the displacement of traditional agribusiness in dollars, acres, and people fed, are left undiscussed. And
Yeah,
that is
so that's important. Okay, I get it. Yeah.
How we can get our hands on that 90% of the food that people eat, that is in the hands of corporate food businesses.
Reason, okay. Makes sense.
The workshop that I attended this morning on how farms are pivoting because of COVID, how farms are adapting. The example of Riverland Farm,
yeah,
and the cooperative that they formed with 3 other farms to supply a lot more consumers, and deliver. That's exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done. And then I would like to see Riverland and other farms form a marketing co-op so that when Whole Foods does say to them, we want a lower price on this or that, the farmers would be able to stand up and say, you have to pay the price that we want.
That's great.
And then maybe we could also take up the ideas and break them up, buy Zephyr Teach out, and take Whole Foods back away from Amazon and make it a separate business. It doesn't have to be part of Amazon. And maybe have the Whole Foods broken up into separate stores, or just a Massachusetts Whole Foods, the way it used to be.
Like Bread and Circus or whatever it was.
And I sold to them. I was one of the first farms that sold to them. And when they made a big deal about how wonderful it was to buy from local farms. And when they were offered lettuces that were 1 cent less a head than the ones that I was offering, they switched to that farm from California that was underselling me.
I know our co-op went out of business.
So what is Joel saying about Whole Foods?
I just said in Worcester, we had a food co-op, a great one, Living Earth, and that went out of business recently for a number of reasons, one of them being Whole Foods. And I was just looking up, there's not a food co-op that's hyper-local focused within, I don't know how many miles of me.
Yeah.
I think the closest one might be Gardner.
Where we are near Riverland, which is in Sunderland, in the Sunderland Collaborative that they were talking about this morning, we have River Valley, which is in Northampton, and they're doing so well. They're opening another branch in East Hampton. So even though the tiny Leverett co-op I guess is going under, I think there is some revival of the co-ops in this area in Western Massachusetts in the Happy Valley. There's also going to be they're starting an Amherst co-op. So I think luckily we're having a little bit of the opposite. And River Valley is responsible for moving a large amount of the local farmer food, being an intermediary, so not direct, but I mean, is carrying a lot of local food.
Yeah, that's a great co-op. And its workforce is also unionized. So that's another interesting aspect of it. So the workers have collective bargaining. The farms could also have collective bargaining. But building that cooperative sector is a really important way to contribute to the demise of the corporate sector. And we have a long way to go. There's lots of work for young people like you, Scully, to be doing in supporting the food co-op. That's probably something that you could do. You could find a way to work to support the nearest food co-op to you.
There's, when you brought up Chris Newman, I posted a link to his blog. And after the question that Dale asked, are there any journalists who are doing a good job of following alternatives in food economics? And I think Chris is a definite leader. Can you think of some other folks we should be following, or publications or outlets we should follow?
Well, Civil Eats has been publishing a lot of good pieces. There's some things on Medium. Well, keep an eye on the Disparity to Parity website. It's going to expand to many more essays in a couple of weeks. They're in preparation. And the people who write for that, people like Jim Goodman, who is now a retired farmer and he's a journalist. He is connected with Food First and Family Farm Defenders. So be on the lookout for stuff from them. Growing for market from the point of view of farmers is a very helpful periodical because it gives very kind of concrete examples from other farms of how you build your local structures, become more efficient, more effective equipment, more effective marketing.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes, 12 more minutes.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
If no one has more questions, I could share a few things about what people in organic agriculture are doing.
Yes, let's go ahead with that. Thank you.
So in organic agriculture, we have the 4 principles of organic agriculture of health, ecology, fairness, and care. And these principles form the basis of the policy work that the NOFAs do. Anything that's within the scope of these principles is what we work on. So issues that lie outside that, we don't try to have like a party line that covers absolutely everything in life. And fairness talks about building on relationships that ensure fairness. And this applies to not just relations among people, but relations between people and all the critters, the 4-leggeds and the microorganisms. So here's the principle of fairness. And it's a very good basis for thinking about what we want our food system to be like. We want it to be based on equity and respect, justice and stewardship of the shared world among people and in our relations to other living beings. Organic farmers are taking part in the Real Organic project. That is just getting to the point now where you'll be able to see a label in the marketplace starting up this year. You'll be able to distinguish which farms are growing in soil. And how do farms get carbon into the soil? One of the things that's been frustrating me in when I participate in the policy arena is many of the people who are involved in working to reduce emissions and get us onto renewables are very taken by big technological approaches to things. And they want to spend billions of the venture capital money that's lying around uncommitted to new gizmos that will somehow take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it somewhere. We already have a free way of doing it. Photosynthesis works really well. Glucose from plants puts it into the soil, and the plants share it with the other microorganisms, and the microorganisms rush in and feed the plants in order to get the carbon. It's a wonderful system that's been developed over millennia, over millions of years. And that is the basis for the work that organic farms are doing. So you can do it by being a gardener yourself or by supporting your organic farms. And then by finding ways, as the Green New Deal unfolds in the policy arena, of supporting price mechanisms that will address all the waste, because farms produce more than is needed because the price is so low. Farms are desperately trying to sell enough to cover their margins, to cover their fixed expenses with the slim margins of what they sell in the marketplace. So we need to get away from that to fair prices with the amount of food grown that's actually needed, and diversifying to a more perennial system, to a much more organic and agroecological system. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I thank you for your good attention today, and be happy to answer any last questions that people might have.
Thank you so much, Liz. I love the good intention and attention. I think that's what
Thank you for your life devoted to all this and all your hard work and thinking on all of this, pushing sustainable ag forward.
Well, it's good to meet you and to know there are people out like you out there, because the work that you're doing is really important. And what we've got to do is give more resources and help you train more people to work with you, so that there's like a whole network of wonderful technical assistant people who will help farmers develop a culture of soil care. But people are worried that, when you put carbon in the soil, it's not permanent. Well, of course it isn't. Carbon cycles continuously in and out of the air. What makes it permanent is having a way of growing food that continually replenishes the soil. It's based on cover crops, rotations, recycling nutrients. And we know that's millennial work that's been developed by peasants on every continent that have contributed to our understanding of how you grow healthy food. There are a few, mainly white men, who try to take credit for having invented this. It wasn't. It was people whose names we don't know, who worked together in their local communities to give us this great knowledge of how to feed ourselves and how to feed our communities. And we need to build on that.
Any last comments? Otherwise, I will just start wrapping it up. Feel free to interject.
Okay, well, thank you, Doug. And let's all work together and build our community and build a big enough movement that we can make the changes that we really want to see.
Yes.